This is Pavan Sukhdev at Yale University. Today I'm here to introduce to you a very special person, Alan White. Alan has been an inspiration, and he has been the founder of a number of institutions and initiatives during his time. Today he is vice president at TELUS Institute, and while he was at TELUS he began something called CORP2020, the vision. Of course, we began CORP2020 as a date by which certain actions must be done, and we will be exploring with Alan to what extent there is a congruence of ideas and intentions. Alan, you began the idea of corporate redesign, and something has been clearly in your mind and bothering you, which led you to do that. What was it? What is it that made you think of corporate redesign and CORP2020?
Well, after 15 years or more of working with corporations, in collaboration with corporations, and looking at problems or challenges that corporations face every day, whether they're transnationals or smaller enterprises, it did occur to me some 6 or 8 years ago that we could do this for very many more years, decades in fact.
And still not solve it.
And still not solve some deep structural problem.
No, this is very much in line with our own thinking here, that goal alignment with society, as we call it, has got to be the beginning of the new corporation.
The purpose of the corporation is to harness private interests in order to advance the public interest. Companies or organizations, they exist in an ecosystem where people, nature, the economy are all so commingled and inseparable, they're inextricably linked. So to take a corporation and put it over on the left side of the table and say, well, you just do your business and everything will be fine, you maximize shareholder value and you'll be doing what you're supposed to do, is a dreadfully outmoded and obsolete concept.
Yes, it's obsolete and narrow.
Particularly in a world in which interdependencies, interconnections are so dense and so complex that we simply can't atomize the corporation as a wholly distinct entity. So the notion that corporations can and should and must and be expected to create what has been called shared value, blended value, there's many names for the same concept, is simply a statement that private wealth is necessary but not sufficient condition for building corporations of the future that are in fact contributors to the betterment of the world.
Do you buy this concept that externalities should be measured and indeed disclosed to society?
Absolutely. It's certainly the term externalities, of course, is now decades old and is one that has been studied, and methodologies thinking about how you measure them, how you quantify them, how you even define them is a work in progress, I would say, and probably will be, because externalities are a function of knowledge, they're a function of science. We don't necessarily know them. One would say today, based upon fairly recent research, that one externality of carbon emissions is increased incidence of epidemic and contagious diseases around the world, such as cholera and malaria. Well, if you had said that 20 years ago, you would get rather raised eyebrows and people trying to connect the dots. Climate change, cholera, I don't quite get it. But now we know that that's the case. Good science tells us that. So it's a very dynamic world. But the basic concept that externalities exist, externalities must be measured, must be disclosed, is now, in today's world, here we are in 2011, absolutely fundamental. At the end of the day, it's going to be governments that step in and say, no, okay, now is the moment. Now is the moment. We've got to get serious about externalities as a matter of just running our countries and running our civilization in an intelligent and sustainable way.
And some of this groundswell of need for accountability, ethics, and transparency seems to have come out of our recent traumatized times with the crisis, with the economic crisis, which of course was driven largely by misuse of leverage.
To me, I've always felt banking ought to be regulated like a public utility. I mean, that's essentially that's what it is. If it's there supporting the whole economy, not just a little piece of this or that. So if you're going to have something like that, just like a monopoly energy company or quasi or oligopolistic energy company, then banking, needs to be properly monitored, which it has not been, unfortunately. If it's too big to fail, it's too big, period.
That is so true.
And there's some truth in that.
Yes. But there are some economists like Coase who would agree with you on
Yes,
that one.
yes. I'm in good company.
That's right. And another point that we want to bring to your notice is this whole idea of advertising. Now, you and I are familiar with the way in which advertising works around the world, and it's probably the most freewheeling of industries, even though they may not see themselves as an industry. A lot of companies are known to have created wants into needs in order to be able to make the next round of products, and suddenly people need something which they didn't. I mean, you want a car for transportation, you don't need a Ferrari.
As Steve Jobs just said, we as companies, we don't wait for consumers to tell us what they want.
Right.
We invent interesting products, and we create the demand. We don't respond to the demand. Well, the rest is history. I mean, Apple's a phenomenally successful company that literally has turned a want into a need, or even created a want.
Created a want, created a need, and the need is a necessity now.
But we can't separate advertising from the broader economic milieu in which we live. I mean, advertising basically, why do people advertise? Well, as you say, to create,
to create more demand.
But even broader than that, it's to fuel growth.
Yes.
Coca-Cola wants more Coca-Cola to be consumed, and Dow Chemical wants more plastics to be in society we live in. So you have to. The deeper question is the role of advertising and the growth paradigm.
Yes.
Growth is the mantra. Growth is the goal. If you don't grow, your company's not performing well according to Wall Street or the city or everybody else, your shareholders. And yet here we live on a planet where endless growth is simply impossible.
It's not possible.
As we define it. So advertising is an instrument, sort of a handmaiden, if you will, to the growth obsession that we're enveloped with.
I'm just wondering whether part of the problem and the constraint can also be addressed with changing taxation.
We need to think about taxes as an instrument for dissuading consumption of intrinsically either limited resources or simply bad resources. But the clock is ticking. We all know that. We have to use taxation intelligently to slow.
That.
Taxes normally viewed as taxes themselves as a bad. Populations don't like to think of taxes. Certainly in the United States, taxes is next to a swear word.
That's right.
But yes, the good side of taxes, intelligent taxes, taxes where they're properly applied in the value chain, properly applied in against products or even services for that matter, that we want less of, not more of. So these are, in fact, it's like smart regulation. People say we're overly regulated, we're harming business. People who say that mostly are not business people, actually. They're pundits and politicians trying to get elected. Most business people don't say that.
That's right.
In my world. So we have to think then of the good side of taxes in terms of innovation drivers, and in the long term, that's really what we want is innovation.
Let me pick on one of the thoughts that you brought in, which resonates a lot with me, which is human capital. In the book, we've got this idea that the new corporation will have, by its nature, an institute. It will be a learning institute. It will train employees, and in the process, of course, because employees naturally do leave at some point, it would have created a positive externality in terms of the training and knowledge that it has imparted, which engenders future incomes and success.
So in concept, it's absolutely brilliant. It's exactly what we would hope companies would do. And a few emphasis courses, an example of that. The issue is how to induce that kind of thinking, because you're basically asking a company to invest its limited resources without appropriating the full benefits.
Exactly, yes.
That's the issue, without appropriating the full benefits for itself.
Correct.
So if I'm a shareholder, again, reliance on our shareholders and their obsession with returns, they would say, I would say, if I had that attitude about my capital, my
it's
shares,
my money. Why did you let it go?
I mean, okay, I understand your training. You want good engineers and good scientists and good managers and investing, but it looks to me like you're investing too much and how are you going to reap the rewards?
Yes.
What's the yield to the company itself, not to society. I'm not in the business of creating public goods here. I'm in the business of creating private wealth. So it goes back to
it's back to the
capital,
the disclosure of the capital.
Exactly.
Yeah, it kind of ties together, doesn't it?
Totally. Human capitalism, not financial capitalism, is the major driver of corporate performance and attracting, retaining, nurturing stewardship of human capital, therefore human capitalism, is really the keys to unlocking the future and creating corporations that are investing and prioritizing how they manage and enhance the human capital within their domains. So lower the temperature on capital control. These quarterly earnings statements that drive earnings choreography and the whole incentives, the signals that go to the CEOs and the top managers of corporations, these are all dreadfully distorted, dreadfully short-term, and they absolutely need to be corrected.
And there's one more dimension, if I may ask you about, which is the community. Now, we used to have neighborhoods in cities, but today even neighborhoods have disappeared because everyone's on the net. Your neighbor could be anyone across the other side of the globe. So there is maybe an alternative community coming through in the net, and the young, I certainly see that. But what about old fogies like us? I mean, where's the community? And I sometimes think back to the corporations that we worked for and worked with. They were community. There were people there whom we cared for. And I'm just wondering whether this is just something we experience in our time, or is this something that should be encouraged or thought of as a virtue of the future corporation?
Well, we can be nostalgic and think of how one held a job for 20, 30 years for the same corporation in the post-war period, which was very common in the Western, certainly in the Western countries. Of course, that's history. That's not reality anymore. But if you look at companies that recognize the concept you've just described, sort of virtual communities, cohesion of another sort, the 21st century cohesion. The one that comes to mind is IBM. They are building and will continue to build. They're very explicit about it. They're redefining their community of colleagues, of comrades, of problem solvers, and it's essentially the planet. That's their community. Now, is that the perfect world? Do I want to actually shake somebody's hand at one point, give them a hug? I do, and I think most human beings do. But we can't have exactly all our hugs and handshakes when we want them, so we have to settle for a little bit less. So let's figure out the best way to optimize the system in the world of high technology and disappearing distance. We are facing multiple crises, clearly, and we have choices to make. The future is not, we can't let the future be a matter of chance. It has to be a matter of choice. So we can put our hopes into a muddle along scenario we call, in my world, market forces. Get by, hope for the best. We can avoid, we hope, a future of what we call barbarization, a very dark, a very grim future of social division, incohesion, conflict. Or we can think about something called a great transition. And within that great transition is a corporation that is redefined, repurposed, redesigned along the lines we've discussed here. I'm hopeful, and that's my mission in life.
That's excellent. And thank you very much, Alan, for all the inspiration and the hard work that you've done. Thank you for being here at Yale with us.
My great pleasure.
That was Alan White, Vice President of the TELUS Institute, talking to us about CORP2020 and why he believes it to be not just a possibility, not just a necessity, but indeed a reality.